The National Desk, America's News Now.
From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Angela Brown. Welcome to the weekend edition of TND. We're going to take a look at the big headlines from the week and also look ahead for you on what you can expect as well. But we start with our 4 top stories that we have been following all week long, and we begin with your money and renewed talk of recession. The stock market is recovering after taking a nosedive earlier this week. But the jobs report did ease some fears of a recession, and Google also took a hit. Google declared a monopoly by a U.S. judge, while the company says it deserves to keep its place at the top. And also extreme weather slams the country coast to coast. The Red Cross raising the alarm over a blood supply shortage because of high temperatures. But first, Vice President Kamala Harris defining her policies at the top of the Democratic ticket, why some, though, are quick to criticize. And we start you off here with former President Donald Trump on the defensive, taking questions at Mar-a-Lago, slamming the vice president and repeating over and over again that he is leading in the presidential race. But many polls are saying something different. Trump and Kamala Harris are neck and neck in swing states, according to a new Ipsos survey. Voters in Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, North Carolina, Nevada, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin have Harris and Trump essentially in a statistical dead heat. Overall, Harris, though, you see there on the side, has 50% support to Trump's 48%. And right now, it appears that Harris is really starting to move to the middle, at least when it comes to her policies leading up to the November election. The National Desk's Kayla Gaskins breaks down her past positions on everything from policing to fracking.
After being unexpectedly catapulted to the top of the Democratic ticket,
good afternoon, Wisconsin!
Kamala Harris is working to clarify her policy positions as she defines her public image.
I launched my campaign for the President of the United States a mere 2 weeks ago.
In her quest to win over independents and middle-of-the-road voters, Harris taking a more moderate approach that, at times, is in opposition to her past positions, what some are calling a recalibration. Take fracking, for example. As a primary candidate in 2019, Harris said this during a CNN town hall.
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. And this is something I've taken on in California. I have a history of working on this issue.
Her campaign now confirming she won't seek a fracking ban if elected. The shift coming as she tries to court voters in places like Pennsylvania.
Oh, it is good to be back in Pennsylvania.
She's also flipped on supporting a single-payer healthcare system. As a U.S. Senator and primary candidate, Harris staunchly supporting Medicare for all, essentially ending private health insurance.
The idea is that everyone gets access to medical care, and you don't have to go through the process of going through an insurance company.
Harris has yet to take a firm stance on healthcare policy this election. As of Wednesday, her official campaign website still didn't have any policies listed. Harris has also adopted more centrist approaches to border security and police reform than she had in the past. We reached out to her campaign to see when we might expect a list of policies on the website and did not hear back in time for this broadcast. As the GOP criticizes Kamala Harris for shifting views on key issues, supporters are giving her credit, pointing out the world has changed a lot in the past few years and she's keeping up with what's best for Americans. In Washington, I'm Kayla Gaskins reporting for the National Desk, America's News Now.
And new details, the Iraqi government has arrested 5 men for an attack on a U.S. military base this week. According to the Pentagon, 4 service members and a contractor were injured at the Al-Assad Air Base on Monday, down from the initial report of 7 people. 3 were flown from the base for additional treatment. The Pentagon spokesperson says an Iran-backed militia is responsible for that attack.
I'm not going to telegraph or get ahead of the secretary, but we always will take measures to protect our forces. And should we decide to respond, it will be at a time and place of our choosing, and I wouldn't be announcing that from the podium.
And Iraq is a rare ally of both the U.S. and Iran. The country hosts 2,500 U.S. troops, but also an Iran-backed militia is linked to security forces. And a new bombshell claim from the prosecutors in Hunter Biden's federal tax case. The Office of Special Counsel David Weiss says Hunter was hired by a Romanian oligarch to influence U.S. policy. If true here, The allegation marks the closest prosecutors have come to tying President Biden to his son's overseas business dealings. Hunter has not responded to the claim made in court filings. He is set to go on trial for the charges next month. And a Republican activist has become the first person to be convicted in Arizona's fake elector case. Lorraine Pellegrino signed a document falsely claiming Trump had won Arizona in the 2020 election. Prosecutors say she pleaded guilty to a misdemeanor charge of filing a false document. The remaining defendants, including former New York City Mayor Giuliani and Trump presidential chief of staff Mark Meadows, have also pleaded not guilty. And now to your money and new data that could put recession fears on hold. The number of people applying for the first time for unemployment benefits has dropped. Here are the numbers right here from the Labor Department on your screen. Jobless claims last week fell to 233,000. Now that's down from 250,000, but the report wasn't all good news here. The number of unemployed still receiving benefits increased to 1.88 million. That is the 9th straight week at or above that level. And right now, predictions when it comes to the recession really are all over the place. But one CEO is sticking to his recession outlook. We were talking about Jamie Dimon here, the CEO of JP Morgan Chase. He says the odds of a soft economic landing are still not great. Dimon told CNBC he believes there's a 35 to 40% chance we avoid a recession. He has been warning of an economic hurricane since 2022, when inflation was at near double digits. And a landmark decision against one of the most powerful companies in the world. A federal judge ruling Google has an illegal monopoly over online sales. The National Desk's Christine Frizzell explains why experts say the decision could mark a turning point.
Is Google a monopoly? For years, the Department of Justice has said yes. A federal judge now agrees, ruling in one of the biggest antitrust lawsuits in a generation that Google has unlawfully used distribution agreements to thwart competition and maintain its monopoly in the market for general search services and in various online advertising markets.
Monopolies threaten the free and fair markets upon which our economy is based. They stifle innovation, they hurt producers and workers, and they increase costs for consumers.
This case focused on Google's search dominance, which the government said it maintained by paying companies like Apple and Samsung tens of billions of dollars to be the default search engine on internet browsers and mobile devices.
The accusation, and now the finding, is that Google has deliberately, in order to shore up its monopoly, made it so that no other search engines can get the kind of scale they would need to be real competitors to Google.
In other words, the more you use Google, the more data it collects on you and what you're likely to click on, which means it will provide the best recommendations. The result? Google now controls roughly 90% of the world's internet searches. A defiant Google promising to appeal the ruling, writing in a statement, "This decision recognizes that Google offers the best search engine, but concludes that we shouldn't be allowed to make it easily available." With other lawsuits against Google, Meta, Amazon, and Apple already underway, some experts say this one may be the turning point.
It sets up a number of possibilities ultimately for the Supreme Court to weigh in and decide what its modern views about monopolization, dominant firm behavior are.
As far as the consequences for Google, they're likely to be laid out in a separate decision that could be months or even years away. I'm Christine Frizzell for the National Desk.
And developing now, some airline passengers are suing Delta after their flights were canceled due to that global tech outage. The lawsuit accuses Delta of refusing basically to give a refund. The July 19th outage was caused by a glitch in an update from cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike. It paralyzed Delta and hundreds of other companies really around the globe. The American Red Cross is facing an emergency blood shortage. The national supply has fallen by more than 25% since July 1st. The organization said extreme heat is a factor here, disrupting almost 100 blood drives last month. The Red Cross said they were short 19,000 blood donations in July due to these disruptions. And sales of the weight loss drug Wegovy rose slower than expected in the second quarter. The Wall Street Journal is saying U.S. sales of Wegovy missed a Barclays forecast by 12%. Despite the drop in total sales, demand continues to exceed supply. Manufacturer Novo Nordisk said sales of the drug rose by 55% in the same period. The company has invested nearly $7 billion to help meet demand. President Biden is calling for sweeping reform to the high court aimed at protecting the rule of law and also restoring America's trust. Now, Emma Withrow from the Fact Check team joins me now to talk about it. What type of changes is the president proposing here?
Yeah, so he released a package with 3 main changes that he wants to accomplish. Number 1, Biden wants to pass a constitutional amendment that would essentially cancel out and reverse the court's previous ruling that a president gets absolute immunity for official acts. Number 2, he wants to institute 18-year term limits for justices on the high bench. And then number 3, Biden wants there to be a binding code of ethics for justices, similar to the one federal judges have to sign when they're sworn in.
How realistic is this? What would it take to get a package like that passed?
It's going to be tough, I'll tell you that. I mean, President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris would have to work with Congress to get this passed. But since Republicans control the House right now, it's very unlikely it would make it through both chambers. House Speaker Mike Johnson actually called the reform package, quote, dead on arrival.
Yes, he did. Emma, thanks so much. Later on, Emma is back to break down how Americans feel about President Biden's high court reform package. Well, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas under fire once again for another trip on a conservative mega donor's private jet. This time, the trip in question is a 2010 flight to New Zealand from Hawaii with Harlan Crow, which the justice never reported. That's according to Senate Finance Committee Chair Senator Ron Wyden. Senator Wyden says the trip may have tax implications if Crow wrote it off on his return. And up next on the national desk, mismanaged market fears of an impending recession following a staggering sell-off on Wall Street. Former White House economic advisor Steve Moore joins us to discuss the likelihood of an emergency rate cut. Plus, an increasing number of Americans do not have health insurance, why experts say some are choosing to simply not to carry it. And welcome back, everyone. Global markets are still seeing some wild swings after a huge sell-off on Monday. The Dow sunk more than 100 points, igniting recession fears. Joining Jan Jeffco to discuss is former White House economic advisor Steve Moore.
Monday was the most intense volatility Wall Street has seen in years, falling 3%. One of the big headlines from yesterday also, the Dow had its first 5-day start to a month in 8 years. What is the story here, Steve? What are you keeping a close eye on?
So I'm getting seasick looking at the stock market. It fell, dramatically on Friday, and then, another 1,000 points on Monday. But it's made a bit of a comeback, Jan, in the last couple of days. So it's hard to figure out what is going on here. I think there is a lot of nervousness about the economy softening. Remember, Jan, on Friday we got a not so good jobs report that showed the economy was slowing down, and I think that spooked a lot of investors. Where this market is headed, boy, I wish I knew. I do think it's very almost certain that the Federal Reserve Bank will lower interest rates in September. The question now is whether it will be a 25 basis point or a 50 basis point reduction. But I would describe the economy right now as soft and kind of in a precarious position, but I'm not. I know a lot of economists were rushing out predicting recession. I still think we could avoid one.
Well, did the Federal Reserve miss that crucial window by holding out on rate cuts until September?
Well, a lot of people think the Fed made a mistake in not cutting interest rates earlier. The good news is we have seen a decline in inflation rates. So now we're down to below 3% on inflation, which is a big improvement from the 9% we had a couple of years ago. So what I see is inflation falling, which is good news, but the jobs situation is deteriorating. So that's bad news. So it's a kind of good news, bad news story on the economy right now.
Right.
And by the way, there was just a report that just came out this morning about the credit card debt, Jan, that has now reached all-time highs. So Americans are borrowing more and more money to pay their bills.
And now we're seeing that the labor market is cooling very fast. So some folks might not have a job to pay those bills. Also, the unemployment rate rose from 4.1% to 4.3%. But you still do not believe the economy is heading into a recession.
Yeah, that was a big jump, and it was the first real big jump we've seen in a while. And I think that's, again, I think that spooked a lot of people. Yeah. When I talk to people running companies, manufacturing companies, construction companies, business services, they're telling me the first half of the year was really good, but in the last 2 or 3 months, they've seen a real decline in their orders and their business. So, you know, it's a time to be a little bit worried, but now is not a time to be adding trillions of dollars of more debt. And that's where I think Washington has added to this crisis by just massive increases in government spending and debt. And if you look at that jobs report that we came out with on Friday, once again, government employment, it continues to be a big part of the picture when we need more jobs in the private sector.
Speaking of which, when the government tries to, you know, somehow not let capitalism work like it should and give money to some of these industries, you know, 2 years ago, the Biden-Harris administration touted the CHIPS Act to bring the semiconductor industry back to the U.S. from China. The cost, though, $280 billion of corporate handouts. Intel was one of the biggest beneficiaries of the CHIPS Act. The company received $8.5 billion taxpayer dollars, not to mention, Steve, billions in tax incentives, and now Intel is laying off 15% of its workforce, which is, I looked this up, roughly about 15,000 jobs. So what do you make of this? What did taxpayers get in exchange for all the government money, the government handouts that was given to Intel?
Yeah, this was the biggest corporate welfare bill maybe in American history. It passed about 18 months ago or so. I opposed it because I don't like the government giving out money to businesses and subsidizing businesses. But the sad part of the story is, as you said, one of the biggest recipients of that money, billions and billions of dollars, was Intel. And yet here they are, Jan, they're laying off workers. Wait a minute, I thought this was supposed to create jobs. Meanwhile, the other big chip maker, of course, is NVIDIA. And I'm very proud of the fact I bought NVIDIA stock last year because NVIDIA has been on quite a run, and it's 10x up. But NVIDIA took no government money, and yet they're doing very well. The company Intel that got all this government money is cutting jobs. So go figure.
I wish I could invest like you. Steve Moore, always good to see you, former White House economic advisor. We appreciate you joining us this morning. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, Jen.
Well, the number of Americans without health insurance has gone up so far in 2024, breaking a streak of record low figures. That's according to a new survey by the CDC. The National Desk's Jeff Harris explains why we are seeing the numbers rise.
I'm told there could be a few different reasons we're seeing an increase so far this year, including a decrease in Medicaid enrollment, the end of pandemic-era insurance policies, plus the economy.
Dr. Richard Ricciardi isn't just an associate dean in the School of Nursing at George Washington University. He also practices at a clinic in Maryland for those without health insurance.
Because there's really nowhere else for them to go.
The patients that Ricciardi sees are a part of the 8% of Americans without health insurance, a number that represents about 27 million people, according to the CDC.
We do the best we can with the limited resources we have as a community-based clinic to accept individuals who have no health insurance.
As for why more Americans don't have health insurance, Ricciardi says there are likely a few reasons, including access to Medicaid.
You know, in many states, the rules surrounding who is eligible to receive Medicaid has changed.
Jacqueline Epstein, a professor of practice in general legal studies, tells us not only did access to Medicaid change this year, but so did the cost.
So Medicaid Part A and Part B, the premiums and deductibles increased in 2024.
Plus, Epstein says the economy and inflation could also be contributing factors.
Increased inflation and cost of living, they're having an effect on what people are willing to spend their monthly budget on. And health insurance the premiums have risen.
Now, Epstein also points out that urgent care could be a contributing factor into these uninsured numbers. According to Urgent Care Association, over 26% of adults visited in urgent care within the last year. I'm Jeff Harris reporting from Washington.
And just ahead, the streets of Las Vegas left in the dark. What the city is doing to crack down on thieves stealing copper wire. Plus, Olympians in training. A gymnastics gym in Rhode Island sees a spike in enrollment after the U.S. gymnastics team brings home hardware from Paris. The National Desk team of reporters is bringing you the headlines from coast to coast. We're taking the pulse of America, and we begin in California. If you want to check out whales this summer, you don't have to go far. Monterey Bay is one of the only places in the world where you can see whales year-round, and the sights are simply amazing.
The water off Monterey Bay is the place to see whales this summer. Humpbacks are most common.
I mean, it's definitely a great time to come whale watching, that's for sure. We saw over 70 humpbacks yesterday on our trip, and which is just amazing, and huge feeding aggregations. So the whales are grouped up in 10 plus animals.
What brings the humpbacks to Monterey?
Specifically come here for all the anchovies and sardines, the small bait fish.
Besides humpbacks, there are blue whales, killer whales, and twice in July, Monterey Bay Whale Watch spotted a sperm whale. Talty says they haven't been around since 2016.
They spend significant amounts of time miles and miles offshore, but every once in a while a lone male will come a little bit closer within range of our boats.
One last thing about humpbacks. They are willing to share the water with sea lions and birds. They're all after the same breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
And now to Rhode Island, and really an impressive run in Paris by the U.S. gymnastics team is getting people interested in the sport. AIM High Academy specializes in training the top young gymnastics talent in the state, and coaches believe the success of the Olympic team will introduce new kids to the sport.
When there's gymnastics happening on TV and everybody cheer Team USA, they feel they're part of the country and they're trying to help them get there.
The Academy says they're hoping to use this momentum to continue growing the sport and break the misconception that gymnastics is predominantly a girls' sport. In Nevada, the growing crime of copper theft has left many across the Las Vegas Valley in the dark. Now a city council member is vowing to address this growing trend by making the sale and also the purchase of scrap metal more difficult. Frustrated residents say they are happy something is finally getting done.
The city is on it, and that's phenomenal, but it needs to be addressed. It's an issue. Like, it's an issue here, it's an issue on the highways, it's an issue between states.
Well, the proposed bill would make metal that has been burned ineligible for sale and require documentation for all transactions. And still ahead, paying for security failures, who's eligible for a $15 million settlement from Cash App? And now keeping an eye on your money. If you've used Cash App anytime since 2018, you could be eligible to receive part of a $15 million settlement. The company accused of negligence after 2 data breaches. You can submit a claim for up to $2,500 if you have used the Cash App or Cash Investing app. Your account was accessed without your permission, got into without your permission, or there were fraudulent transfers on your account in the last 4 years. Costco is rolling out a new verification process for customers. They are now scanning membership cards at various locations to target unauthorized membership use. Instead of just showing your card, members now scan the back of their card or digital QR code. Scanners are already in place in California and also some locations in the Northeast plan to follow suit as well. Now members can still enter with a member. And ahead in our next half hour, bipartisan backlash, a plea deal for the alleged mastermind of the 9/11 attacks taken back, the fallout and potential legal implications, plus financial aid failure, the problems with the FAFSA forms, delays their release again, when students can expect to get them. You're watching the National Desk, America's News Now. You can catch us live weekdays from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. And of course, anytime online at thenationaldesk.com. We will be right back.
The National Desk, America's News Now.
So they feel like, you know what, we're on a par with the police in terms of power and stature.
Increasing vigilance, the violent Venezuelan gang that has law enforcement across the country on high alert. Plus, Ukraine on the offense. The cross-country attack this week, Russia is calling a large-scale provocation. And later, President Biden calls for major Supreme Court reforms, how Americans are actually feeling about these proposed changes. From the nation's capital, this is the National Desk, America's News Now. I'm Angela Brown. The U.S. government has now designated Tren de Aragua a transnational criminal organization as crimes tied to this violent Venezuelan gang pop up across the country. The National Desk's Matt Gelka explains how law enforcement is attempting to rein in the problem before it spirals out of control.
Law enforcement is on high alert over the threat of a gang they say has a growing presence in the United States. The New York Post reports Homeland Security warned agents that members of Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua have been given a, quote, green light to shoot cops in Denver. The memo from the Chicago office encouraged other agents to be vigilant.
We're literally watching a rerun of the same movie.
Former acting Customs and Border Protection Commissioner Mark Morgan says the gang rivals the brutality of MS-13. Tren de Aragua members have been connected to murders, trafficking, violent robberies, and attacks on police around the country.
We are behind the power curve already, and this administration's reaction was to actually allow Venezuelans to become part of the 400,000 individuals from 4 different countries that they're unlawfully utilizing parole to allow them to come to the United States.
This video from June shows 2 New York police officers being released from the hospital after being shot trying to arrest one of the gang members. Experts say having a green light to shoot at cops is not surprising.
In Venezuela, the police very casually shoot at them. And so they feel like, you know what, we're on a par with the police in terms of power and stature. And they shoot at us, so we're going to shoot at them.
El Paso, Texas officials told the Daily Mail that the gang is now basing its operations right across the border in Ciudad Juarez. Meanwhile, the State Department is offering rewards for up to $12 million for information that leads to the arrests of 3 of the gang's leaders. For the National Desk in Washington, I'm Matt Gelke.
And this week, Ukraine launched a ground attack over Russia's southwestern border. Russian President Vladimir Putin described it as a large-scale provocation. The U.S. State Department noted the irony.
I have seen the statements from the Russian government is a little bit rich, them calling it a provocation, given Russia violated Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. You said 900 days. It actually goes back much longer than that. It goes back to 2014 and continues to illegally occupy Ukrainian territory.
And Miller says the U.S. policy about cross-border use of American weapons has not changed and that the policy has not been violated with these actions. Well, it appears a new anti-theft software updates in Hyundai and Kia vehicles are apparently doing their jobs. Vehicle theft claims were down 64% for those with those software updates with those cars. That's according to the Highway Loss Data Institute. Thefts of these vehicles increased by more than 1,000% between 2020 and 2023, largely due to a series of social media posts detailing how to actually steal those cars. And one of the nation's largest school districts is putting new safety measures in place. Clark County School District in southern Nevada is installing a new weapons detection system with student safety in mind. Last year, CCSD police recovered over 300 weapons. The district will use the enhanced weapons detection system for large-scale athletic events and also random screenings when students arrive at school.
It's about one person every 3 seconds, and that's just to allow the system to reset and get back on target for the next person to walk through.
And other security measures include requiring students to wear an ID badge at all times. Local law enforcement will also be setting up a command post to better coordinate with school officials and federal agencies in an emergency. Students attempting to get federal help to pay for college will have to wait just a little bit longer. The Department of Education announced this week that the FAFSA forms for the 2025-2026 school year will not be available until December 1st. The delay comes after a disastrous rollout of the revamped forms the department launched earlier this year. The forms will be available in October for a small group of people to identify errors and also bugs in the system. A new study has found a text message program appears to be helping some teens quit vaping. Truth Initiative, a nonprofit focused on ending tobacco use, developed the program titled This Is Quitting. More than 780,000 young people have used the text messaging program, which is free and also anonymous. The study published in the medical journal JAMA found teens who used the program were 35% more likely to report they had quit vaping after 7 months. Last Friday, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin revoked the deal the Office of Military Commissions made with the accused mastermind of the 9/11 terror attacks and his co-conspirators. The National Desk D.D. Gatton sat down with an expert earlier this week to discuss that move.
Joining us now, Bill Souter, retired Army JAG and former senior legal advisor to the military commissions. Thanks for joining us tonight. You bring a wealth of experience. We want to start with the most recent attack on a U.S. base in Iraq. With that backdrop, if the U.S. ever puts a deal back on the table, what do you think the impact could be?
The impact could be case determinative. If they want to go through with the plea bargain, then they will. Secretary of Defense Austin is the superior convening authority, so he'll make that decision. He took it away from the local convening authority, not only in these 3 cases, but 2 others. We refer to them as the Big Five, the 911 co-conspirators. So we're back to square one as far as the trial and what's going to happen. Motions will continue to be litigated, and ultimately, supposedly, we're supposed to have a trial where the death penalty is going to be asked for. The plea bargain agreement took that off the table, and by revoking that plea bargain, it is back on the table.
Clearly a lot of questions as we move forward, but have to ask you, prosecutors in this case, as we look back, they had been discussing the possibility of a plea deal for more than 2 years. That would have dismissed evidence obtained during torture. So the question now that the plea deal is revoked, what happens to that evidence?
The agreement is off, and it'll be up to the judge to determine whether that type of evidence concerning the confessions, waterboarding, those kind of things will be allowed. There's a case not involved in these 5 where a judge has ruled that a confession was obtained by coercion and was inadmissible. But those same questions will have to be decided in these cases. Every case is different. This one's a little bit unusual, and they have 5 defendants. So all of them got treated a little differently, and one may have their confession come into evidence, and the other one may not. So it is a very, very complicated legal matter that the United States has on its hands and always has, and it looks like always will.
Speaking of the United States and looking at the impression the United States will have on the world, is one of the accused masterminds in the 9/11 attack, along with his co-conspirators. What does it say if the U.S. makes a plea deal with them? What message do you think does this send around the world?
I don't think a plea deal in itself was bad. I think we look bad because we made it and then we revoked it. We did not have a good line of communication, evidently. Whatever we decide to do, let's do it and go forward and carry it out. This going back and forth is not good for the United States or the system or for the defendants, for that matter. But everything is kind of square one, and the death penalty is the whole holdup, my understanding, that the plea bargain would have taken that off the table in exchange for the 3 individuals involved in that plea for a life sentence. So I don't think that the international community would look at the United States even in a worse light if we continue with that plea bargain. It shows that we are about justice. I'm okay with the death penalty, but I'm not the one making the decision. And if it's the right thing to do in light of justice, then let's do it and move on.
Bill Souter, retired Army JAG and former senior legal advisor to the military commissions. First of all, thank you for your service. We appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
And for the first time in recent years, most Americans say they oppose sending U.S. troops to defend Israel if it comes under attack. A new Chicago Council on Global Affairs survey found 55% of Americans oppose U.S. boots on the ground in Israel. 41% support the idea. Republicans are more supportive of such a move, with 55% saying they favored sending troops. Just 35% of Democrats and independents agree. And now to that setback for Harvard. The university requested to dismiss a lawsuit over anti-Semitism on campus has been denied by a federal judge. Now, Jewish students sued the university alleging it ignored discrimination involving the protests tied to the Israel-Hamas war. A federal judge is allowing parts of that lawsuit to move forward. Brown University and New York University settled similar lawsuits last month. Columbia University also settled, agreeing to provide safety escorts for students on campus. President Biden's Supreme Court reform package is getting some backlash from both Republicans and also some conservatives. But the big question, of course, for you at home is, how do Americans feel about these proposed changes to the High Court? Emma from the Fact Check team joins me now. Now, Emma, what consensus are you getting? When it comes to Americans, what do they feel about these proposed changes?
Yeah, still a little bit unclear, but I did some digging, couldn't find any recent polls showing how Americans feel specifically about this new reform package. But I did find quite a bit of data on how Americans feel about the Supreme Court in general. A poll from the Associated Press and Newark Center for Public Affairs found 67% of Americans support term limits for justices instead of just letting them stay on the bench for life. Biden's proposal actually would limit justices to 18-year terms. He said it would make nominations more predictable, limit the chance that a single president could shape the court for generations to come, and just give more options there.
That is so interesting. Over half prefer some sort of term limit. So what did you find out when it comes to how people feel about the integrity of the High Court and also partisanship?
Yeah, it seems like we're seeing shifts there. So the same poll from the AP showed about 7 in 10 Americans think justices are more influenced by ideology and partisan politics, while only about 3 in 10 think they're likely to provide an independent check on other branches of the government by being fair and impartial. And these findings actually tie into another one of President Biden's reform proposals that would make justices sign a binding code of ethics that requires them to disclose gifts, refrain from public political activity, and also recuse themselves from cases in which they or even their spouses have financial or or other conflicts of interest.
Well, let's look kind of into the past here. Have any other presidents tried to reform the high court? And if so, were any of them successful?
Not really. I dug into kind of the recent proposals. I think the last one that made some sort of waves was when President Roosevelt tried to reform the court. Pretty much all of them have failed, and it's just tough to get one of these passed. And when you look at trying to get support from Congress and the Senate, there's just, it's tough. It's an uphill battle, to say the least.
Yeah, and I know Biden's package will be an uphill battle as well.
Yeah.
Emma, thanks. For more on this fact-check team topic, including links to their sources, scan the QR code on your screen or visit thenationaldesk.com. The Department of Energy is working to strengthen the country's electrical grid against extreme weather. Officials are awarding $2.2 billion for 8 projects nationwide to upgrade transmission lines and also to build some new ones. The goal is to make sure, essentially, the power grid will hold up during severe weather. The DOE says this will also provide more reliable electricity for 56 million homes and businesses. Still to come, our team of correspondents breaks down this week in Washington. The race to the White House obviously heating up, plus new details on Hunter Biden's business dealings.
And welcome back. Our Washington Bureau covers the nation's capital every day, and our team of correspondents reports on the important issues facing the country and how they impact you. Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris unveiled Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her running mate this past week, and Republicans welcomed him to the race by going after his record, including his military record. National correspondent Kayla Gaskins, what's the controversy there?
So, Steve, Walz has talked a lot about his military record. He's used it on the campaign trail. It's very much a part of his persona, and Republicans are now picking that record apart. So we'll start with some comments that Walz made regarding guns, because he is pro-gun control. And he said that we should not be allowing weapons like he carried in war be carried on the streets. Now, Walz, it turns out, has never been to war. He's never been to a combat zone. He was with the National Guard for 24 years. He was in Italy doing training, but he retired before heading into combat. So that's something that J.D. Vance, who is a Marine, has hit Walz on there. But then, Steve, there's also the question of his rank. So he retired. He says he's a retired command sergeant major, and he was in the process of actually achieving this rank when he retired, but he never finished that process. And so at his actual retirement, and what's on his military records is the rank right below that, because he never finished that process. But Walz still went with the higher rank on his website. He campaigned on the higher rank. And so that's what's causing J.D. Vance to accuse him of stolen valor, which, Steve, is a pretty serious charge, especially among military communities. It's something that those in our armed services take very seriously.
And Democrats say it's rich that they're going after Walz on his military record when Donald Trump was accused of dodging the draft in Vietnam, and J.D. Vance only served 6 months in a combat zone, but as a reporter and a photographer, and not actually in combat. So we'll see if that has any legs. But Democrats have also been basking in a renewed unity since Kamala Harris took over the top of the ticket. But this week, there was a speed bump as she was heckled at one of her rallies. Kayla, what happened there?
So the pro-Palestinian protests that have been dominating the news cycles really since the war broke out between Israel and Hamas last October. We've seen this at political rallies. We've seen this through the streets in Washington, D.C. Well, they've been pretty quiet the last couple of weeks since Joe Biden stepped down and Kamala Harris got to the top of the ticket. But then at her rally in Detroit, Michigan yesterday, protesters did attend, and they did attempt to start some chants saying Kamala is calling for genocide as an attempt to interrupt her rally. Kamala Harris pretty handedly and quickly, caused those comments to stop. She told them that she was speaking, that they needed to be silent, and said if they kept that up, then they were helping Donald Trump get elected. And you could hear the crowd behind her as she stood up to the protesters, essentially. But Michigan's a really important state, Steve. Michigan is a very important state here, Steve, because it has a very large Arab American community. They've been very vocal about their displeasure with the White House's response regarding Israel and their continued support for Israel. 100,000 voters voted uncommitted during the primaries. That was for Joe Biden. And Kamala Harris really needs those voters to turn out in a swing state like Michigan this November.
Right. It's a state that is very close the last two elections, and those voters are going to be very important. As you said, Kamala Harris hopes that those 100,000 who voted uncommitted for Joe Biden or against Joe Biden will show up and vote this time around. There are new developments regarding Hunter Biden's foreign business dealings as he readies for another federal trial next month. National correspondent Christine Frizaro, what's the latest?
Yeah, this in many ways is the big trial, Steve. This deals with Hunter Biden's business deals overseas. It's less than a month away. And earlier this week, Special Counsel David Weiss introduced new evidence. And this is dealing with Romania, a Romanian businessman named Gabriel Popoviciu, who Weiss says paid Hunter Biden to try to influence U.S. policy and help Popoviciu. There was an investigation in Romania against him. He wanted the United States to launch sort of an investigation into the investigation. And there is evidence that Hunter Biden was paid for this. Now, here's the biggest glaring red light. This has to do with the Foreign Agent Registration Act, or FARA. Hunter Biden and his business associate did not register under this. So that would be a violation if they were trying to influence policy. We've got the business associate who was unnamed in the filing, apparently is going to be testifying in the upcoming trial. This is a lot to watch on top of the other business dealings with China, Russia, and others, Steve.
Christine, Kayla, great reporting as always. Thank you both for your hard work. Back to you.
And up next, mid-air mayhem, what a man did to disrupt a Seattle flight in progress, causing the plane to divert from its route and bled dry. New firearms regulation forcing one California city's only gun store to close its door for good. This is the National Desk, America's News Now. We have reporters all across the country in your neighborhoods covering issues that matter to you, from a new plan to clean up homeless encampments in Tennessee to a man facing charges after chaos on a flight from Washington State. We are taking the pulse of America, but we start with a gun shop owner who says the laws and also the policies in California are forcing him to close down for good.
In June was the first month that we didn't make money. Then July and the taxes hit and we lost even more money.
Farrell says because of new laws in California, firearm stores are required to have $1 million liability insurance policy and add an additional 11% tax for customers.
So a $500 gun now costs about $650 out the door, which is huge.
And get more cameras.
So we had to invest about $10,000 to $12,000 on the video and audio surveillance system that the state of California requires for the gun shops. So that was a big hit for us.
With all the additional costs, Farrell says he just can't afford it anymore.
Another well-known homeless encampment shut down in Hermitage. This after years of community complaints. And after at least 4 camps have been shut down through the city's phase plan, now community advocates want to see Old Tent City addressed next.
How are you guys?
Barry Dupnick, who's been cleaning up the homeless encampments across the city for years, says Old Tent City is the biggest in the Tri-County area, calling on immediate action.
I've been down there for about 2.5 years, trying to, clean and help people get out of that situation. But it is a massive camp, so there's a lot of drug use.
Right now, the Office of Homeless Services won't disclose what camps will be addressed next, but their prioritization team will base it off vulnerability, people, location, and environment.
Video shows flight staff trying to control a screaming man locked in the bathroom aboard an American Airlines flight between Seattle and Dallas in mid-July.
Hey, did you record that?
That man is identified in a federal grand jury indictment filed Wednesday as 26-year-old Eric Gapko of New Jersey. Documents saying he allegedly assaulted and intimidated a flight attendant, tried to open the aircraft exterior doors multiple times mid-flight, vaped on board, and bothered other passengers. Passengers apparently take matters into their own hands, helping flight crew tie up his hands and feet while the flight diverts to Salt Lake City.
You say potato, I say potato.
Where video shows Salt Lake City police escorting Gapko off and to jail.
And still ahead on the National Desk, America's News Now from Atlanta to the Atlantic, how rail cars are being used underwater to protect coral reefs. A new statue of baseball legend Jackie Robinson has returned to Kansas 6 months after it was stolen. The original sculpture of Robinson was cut off at his ankles in January, leaving behind only the cleats. An outpouring of support and hundreds of thousands of dollars in donations rolled in after that, after the news of the stolen statue shocked the Wichita community and spread across the country. The donations helped fund the replacement statue as well as improvements to the plaza where it stands right now. And developing now, archaeologists made a historic find in Egypt in the port city of Damietta. They have discovered or uncovered more than 60 ancient tombs filled with gold artifacts, coins, and pottery. The relics are believed to be over 2,500 years old. And from Atlanta, Georgia to the Atlantic Ocean, 2 old rail cars from Atlanta's transit system are now being repurposed as reef habitats for marine wildlife. About 7 months ago, the cars were cleaned, then deployed into the water several miles off the Georgia coast. Officials say soft coral is already growing on the former vehicles, with 9 species of game fish seen moving in. And now that's all for us on the weekend edition of the National Desk America's News Now. Don't forget, you can catch us live from 6 a.m. to 11 a.m. and then 10 p.m. to midnight Eastern Time. Check your local listings. You can also watch us online and catch up with all of the latest headlines on thenationaldesk.com. Thank you so much for watching the weekend edition of the National Desk. I'm Angelo Brown, and from all of us here, have a great week. Okay, I'm gonna go.